The ring meant everything to me. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, and I live in a small town in Ohio. For most of my life, I believed that love was simple. You meet the right person, you build a home together, and you face every problem side by side. When I married my husband Jason, I thought that was exactly what we were doing. But I was wrong. The day I learned the truth, I felt as if a piece of my heart had been torn away. And it all started with my wedding ring. 3 years ago, Jason and I stood in front of our family and friends and promised to love each other forever. We didn't have much money back then. Actually, we still don't. Our wedding was small. We rented a community hall, decorated it with flowers from my mother's garden, and asked friends to help with the food. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. I still remember the moment Jason slipped the ring onto my finger. His hands were shaking. He smiled nervously and whispered, "Emily, I can't give you a mansion or a luxury car, but I can give you my whole heart." Everyone laughed softly. I cried. Even now, I can remember how happy I felt. The ring itself wasn't expensive. It was a simple gold band with a tiny diamond in the center. But to me, it was priceless. It represented our promises, our future, our family. I wore it every single day. I wore it while cooking dinner. I wore it while grading papers after work. I even wore it when I cleaned the house on weekends. Sometimes Jason joked that I loved the ring more than him. I always laughed and said, "The ring reminds me of you." For a long time, our life was ordinary and happy. I worked as a kindergarten teacher at a local elementary school. Every morning, I spent my days teaching children how to read, count, and share with each other. The job wasn't easy, but I loved it. Jason worked as a delivery driver. His schedule was busy, especially during holidays. Some days he left home before sunrise and returned after dark. Money was always tight. Every month felt like a balancing act. Rent, electricity, gas, groceries, car payments. There was always another bill waiting for us. But somehow we managed. We cooked meals at home instead of eating at restaurants. We watched movies on the couch instead of going to expensive theaters. We laughed often, and that was enough. At least it used to be. A few months ago, things began to change. At first, the changes were small. Jason seemed tired all the time. He spent more evenings staring silently at his phone. Sometimes I would ask what he was thinking about. He would simply say, "Nothing." But I knew it wasn't nothing. The man who used to tell me everything was suddenly keeping secrets. One evening, I found him sitting alone at the kitchen table. The room was dark except for a small lamp above his head. Several bills were spread across the table. His face looked worried. "Everything okay?" I asked gently. He forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking." I sat beside him. "You know we can figure things out together, right?" "Of course," he said quickly. But he didn't look at me. That worried me more than his words. Over the next few weeks, he became even quieter. Sometimes he stayed late at work. Sometimes he left the room when answering phone calls. Sometimes I caught him staring into space with a troubled expression. I wanted to help him. But every time I asked questions, he changed the subject. One Friday night, after dinner, he finally admitted that money was becoming a problem. "The car needs repairs," he said, "and I'm still paying off some credit card debt." I nodded. "Then let's make a plan together." His shoulders immediately became tense. "No," he said softly. "I'll handle it." I remember feeling confused. Since when did we solve problems separately? Marriage was supposed to be teamwork. At least, that's what I believed. That night, we went to bed without saying much. Jason fell asleep quickly. I couldn't. The moonlight shone through the bedroom window. I turned toward him and watched his sleeping face. For the first time in our marriage, I saw fear there. Not anger, not frustration, fear. I reached down and touched my wedding ring. The familiar gold felt warm against my skin. It comforted me. It reminded me that no matter what happened, we would face it together. At least, that's what I thought, because only a few days later, that ring would disappear, and my life would never be the same again. The next Tuesday started like every other day. My alarm rang at 6 o'clock. I got out of bed quietly so I wouldn't wake Jason. The morning air felt cold as I walked to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and began getting ready for work. Then I noticed something strange. My left hand felt lighter. I looked down. My heart stopped. My wedding ring was gone. For a second, I simply stared at my finger. There was an empty space where the ring had always been. "No," I whispered. My stomach tightened. I checked the bathroom counter. Nothing. I searched the sink. Nothing. I hurried back into the bedroom. The blankets flew across the room as I pulled them apart. I checked under pillows, under the bed, inside drawers. Nothing. Panic began rising inside me. Jason woke up when he heard the noise. "What happened?" he asked sleepily. "My ring is missing." He sat up immediately. "What?" "My wedding ring. It's gone." For a moment, his face changed. It happened so quickly that I almost missed it. Shock. Fear. Then it disappeared. "We'll find it," he said. His voice sounded strange, not comforting, nervous. I searched the apartment for nearly an hour, every room, every corner, every piece of furniture. The ring had vanished. Finally, I had to leave for work. But all day, I couldn't focus. While my students practiced writing letters, I kept staring at my empty finger. While they laughed and played games, I kept thinking about the missing ring. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about jewelry. It was about memories. That ring carried the happiest day of my life, and now it was gone. That evening, I searched the apartment again. Jason helped for a while, but something felt wrong. He seemed distracted, almost uncomfortable. After dinner, I finally asked him directly, "Jason, have you seen my ring?" He looked away, only for a second, but I noticed. "No," he said. His answer came too quickly. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Days passed. Then a week. The ring never appeared. I checked my classroom, my car, my purse, every place I had visited. Nothing. The loss began to hurt more than I expected. Every time I looked at my hand, I felt sadness. One Saturday morning, I made a decision. I would visit local pawn shops. Maybe someone had found the ring and sold it. The idea seemed impossible, but I needed answers. The first pawn shop didn't have it. Neither did the second. By afternoon, I was tired and disappointed. I almost went home. Then I noticed one more shop across the street. A small building with faded paint and dusty windows. I walked inside. An older man stood behind the counter. I showed him a photograph from my wedding day. "My ring looked like this," I explained. "It's probably a long shot." The man studied the picture carefully. Then his expression changed. "I think I've seen that ring." My heart began pounding. "What?" He nodded slowly. "Wait here." He disappeared into the back room. A few moments later, he returned carrying a small jewelry tray. The moment I saw it, I knew. It was my ring. My wedding ring. The tiny diamond. The small scratch near the band. Everything was exactly the same. Tears instantly filled my eyes. "Oh my God!" Relief washed over me. But it lasted only a few seconds. Because then another question appeared. Who sold it? The shop owner opened a file. "Let me check the paperwork." My hands trembled. I wasn't prepared for what came next. The man glanced at the document. Then he read the name aloud. Jason Carter. The world seemed to stop moving. I couldn't breathe. "Excuse me?" I whispered. He looked confused. The seller's name was Jason Carter. My knees felt weak. "No," I said quietly. "No, that's impossible." But deep inside, I already knew. The nervous answers, the late nights, the fear in his eyes. Suddenly, everything made sense. The pawn shop owner continued speaking, but I barely heard him. The words became distant noise. My husband had sold my wedding ring. My husband. The man who placed it on my finger. The man who promised to love me forever. I somehow walked back to my car. Rain had started falling. Heavy drops struck the windshield like tiny explosions. I sat behind the steering wheel and cried. Not because I lost a piece of jewelry, not because of the money. I cried because trust had been broken. The ring wasn't gold. The ring wasn't a diamond. The ring was our marriage. And Jason had sold it. That night, I waited for him to come home. The pawn shop receipt rested on the kitchen table in front of me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. For the first time since our wedding day, I was afraid of what my husband might say, and even more afraid of the truth. I sat alone at the kitchen table for nearly 2 hours. The rain continued falling outside. The pawn shop receipt lay in front of me. I had read Jason's name on it at least 20 times. Each time, the words hurt just as much. My husband sold my wedding ring. No matter how many times I repeated the sentence in my head, it still felt unreal. I looked at the clock. 7:30, then 8, then 8:15. Finally, I heard keys at the front door. My heart began pounding. Jason stepped inside carrying his work bag. He smiled when he saw me. But the smile disappeared immediately. He noticed my face. Emily? I didn't answer. Instead, I pushed the receipt across the table. His eyes moved down to the paper. The moment he saw it, all the color drained from his face. The room became silent, painfully silent. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. Tell me I'm wrong. My voice was barely above a whisper. Jason stared at the receipt, then at the floor, then back at the receipt. He couldn't look at me. That told me everything. Tell me, I said again. This time my voice shook. His shoulders slowly dropped. And then he whispered the word I never wanted to hear. It's true! I felt as if someone had punched me in the chest. The little hope I had been holding onto disappeared. You sold it? Jason closed his eyes. Yes. The tears came immediately. I couldn't stop them. Why? He remained silent. Why would you do that? Still no answer. I stood from my chair. Anger mixed with heartbreak. You took my wedding ring, Jason. I know. You lied to me. I know. You watched me search the entire apartment. His eyes filled with tears. I know. The sadness in his voice almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. But the pain was too fresh. I crossed my arms tightly. So explain it. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he slowly sat down across from me. His hands trembled. I never wanted this to happen. Then why did it happen? He took a deep breath and finally told me the truth. It started 6 months earlier. His younger sister, Sarah, had become seriously ill. She needed several medical treatments. Most of them weren't fully covered by insurance. The bills grew larger every month. Sarah was embarrassed. She didn't want family members worrying about her. So she begged Jason not to tell anyone, including me. At first, Jason used his savings to help her. Then he worked overtime, extra shifts, weekend deliveries, anything he could find. He sold old electronics, tools from his garage, even his favorite guitar. But it wasn't enough. The medical bills kept coming, and Sarah's condition kept getting worse. I was desperate, he admitted quietly. I didn't know what else to do. I listened without speaking. Part of me understood. Part of me still felt betrayed. Jason wiped his eyes. The hospital needed payment immediately. Sarah was terrified. I promised I'd help her. His voice cracked. I wasn't thinking clearly. Then he looked directly at me for the first time. The ring was the only thing left worth enough money. I stared at him, unable to speak. He lowered his head. I told myself I would buy it back before you noticed. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Before I noticed? I know how stupid that sounds. Very stupid. I know. The room fell silent again. Neither of us moved. Finally, I asked the question that mattered most. Why didn't you tell me? Jason's eyes filled with tears once more. For several seconds, he couldn't answer. Then he whispered softly, because I was ashamed. I frowned. Ashamed? He nodded. I couldn't take care of my family. Jason! I couldn't help my sister without selling things. His voice broke completely, and every day I felt like more of a failure. The word hit me hard. Failure. I had never seen him that way, not once. But somehow, he had convinced himself that I would. He looked down at his hands. I was afraid. Afraid of what? His answer came so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. Afraid you'd stop believing in me. The anger inside me began fading. Not disappearing, just changing. Because suddenly I realized something. The biggest problem wasn't the ring. The biggest problem wasn't money. It wasn't even Sarah's illness. The real problem was that my husband had been carrying this burden alone. He didn't trust me enough to share it. And that hurt more than anything. Tears rolled down my face again. Jason was crying too. Two people sitting only a few feet apart, yet somehow feeling miles away from each other. Neither of us knew what would happen next. Neither of us knew whether our marriage could survive this. The only thing we knew was that the truth had finally come out. And sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie. The weeks after that conversation were some of the hardest weeks of my life. Nothing magically became better. There was no dramatic apology that fixed everything. No movie-like moment where all the pain disappeared. Trust doesn't heal overnight, and neither does a broken heart. Jason and I still lived together, but things felt different. Sometimes we sat in silence during dinner. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we argued, and sometimes we cried. For the first time in our marriage, we stopped pretending everything was okay. Instead, we started telling each other the truth. The whole truth. Jason told me about every bill he had hidden, every payment he had made for Sarah, every sleepless night he had spent worrying. And I told him how deeply he had hurt me, how alone I felt while searching for my ring, how betrayed I felt when I discovered the truth. Neither conversation was easy, but they were necessary. Slowly, something began to change. The wall between us started disappearing. One evening, Jason sat beside me on the couch. The television was on, but neither of us was watching it. "I don't expect you to forgive me yet," he said quietly. I looked at him. He seemed different. Not because he had changed physically, but because the secrets were gone. For the first time in months, he looked honest. "I know I broke your trust," he continued. "I know I can't fix that with words." I nodded. He was right. Words alone weren't enough. But I could see that he was trying. Every day he was trying to communicate, trying to be open, trying to become the husband I remembered. And little by little, I began believing him again. 3 months later, Sarah's condition improved. The treatments were finally working. The doctors were optimistic. The day we received the good news, Jason cried with relief. So did I. Despite everything that had happened, Sarah was family. And family matters. A few weeks later, Jason surprised me. It was Saturday afternoon. He asked me to get in the car. "Where are we going?" I asked. "It's a surprise." 20 minutes later, we stopped in front of a small jewelry store downtown. I looked at him in confusion. Jason smiled nervously. Then he opened the door for me. Inside, the owner greeted us warmly. Without saying a word, Jason pointed toward a small display case. My eyes widened. There, resting inside a velvet box, was a beautiful gold ring. Simple, elegant, not expensive, but beautiful. I turned toward him. Jason! His hands were shaking, just like they had on our wedding day. I know it's not the same ring, he said softly. I know I can never replace what I sold. Tears filled my eyes. He swallowed hard. But I wanted to give you something. I stared at the ring, then at my husband, then back at the ring again. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, I closed the box gently. Jason's face fell. I don't want it? He asked sadly. I smiled through my tears. Then I took his hand. No. His expression became confused. I placed the ring box between us. We'll buy it together. What? We're a team, remember? His eyes widened. Emily. I squeezed his hand. This time, no secrets. A tear rolled down his cheek. No secrets, he repeated, and no carrying problems alone. He nodded. Together, we purchased the ring, not as a gift from a husband to a wife, but as a promise between partners, a promise to face life's difficulties together. Months later, I slipped that ring onto my finger, and every time I look at it, I remember something important. The most valuable thing in a marriage isn't gold. It isn't diamonds. And it certainly isn't the price of a ring. It's trust. Because a ring can be lost. A ring can be sold. A ring can be replaced. But trust must be earned every single day. Today, Jason and I still face challenges. Life isn't perfect. Sometimes money is tight. Sometimes problems appear without warning, but now we talk. We share. We lean on each other, just as a married couple should. My name is Emily Carter, and my husband once sold my wedding ring. For a long time, I thought that was the saddest part of my story, but I was wrong. The saddest part wasn't losing the ring. The saddest part was losing trust. And the happiest part wasn't finding a new ring. It was finding each other again. Because in the end, the real promise was never the ring. The real promise was us.